Hello, good evening, everybody. So tonight's topic is a very popular one, unfortunately, in clinic. It's the topic of back pain. So, why is it such a popular topic? Well, it turns out that back pain is one of the most common things that people come to see their physician about. Whether it's primary care or internal medicine, many people succumb to the ravages of back pain. As a matter of fact, one of the reasons why I recorded the short posture exercise video back in November of 2016, if I remember right, is because it is such an easy, simple thing to teach someone in clinic, and yet the way things are, it's a nice one to be able to teach, but also be able to refer people back to that one video, because posture is one of the most important things when it comes to preventing back pain. And yet, culturally and by habit, very recently, posture is one of the main things that is lacking in our education. I'll tell you, there's so many times when I see young kids come in, and I'm not picking on anyone, it's just what I see. And you see all these kids come in, and they're all kind of slouched over like this. I'm exaggerating a little bit, maybe not that much, but, and you can see what happens is the shoulders go up, the shoulders go forward. Nowadays, I can't use my phone as an example because I'm recording on the phone tonight, but people are looking down a lot. And when you look down a lot, well, guess what is holding up your head? Not the bones of the spine, but all these little itty bitty muscles back in there end up holding your head up. And similarly, when the posture is chronically curled forward, it puts a lot of pressure down on the lower back. So there's a lot of different kinds of things that can be done for low back pain, and also some things to be mindful to basically to be watching out for. And so most back pain is run-of-the-mill back pain. It's basically, for whatever reason, some muscles got tense, they got sore, you pushed something too hard, you pulled something too hard, you lifted up something without using proper lifting technique, which, by the way, is not leaning over, and I'm going to pick up this hairbrush here, leaning over, trying to pick it up that way. That's using all those little muscles of the back that are not supposed to be used necessarily to pick up things, but really good proper lifting technique is you grab your item, you hold it close, and instead of lifting from the back, you lift with the legs. And this is not exactly the right format to teach that part, but it's just a general quick and easy idea. So most back pain, as said, is a little bit of muscle tightness. Somewhere up in there, a muscle was a little bit tensed. And tension can happen for many reasons. Physical issues, of course. The muscles get weak from chronic non-use because they're kind of in funny positions. Mental tension is a very common correlate of back pain. So when somebody is going through a stressful time, they might not always realize it, but their unconscious holds the body in a different position, in a different way. When you look at somebody else, you can usually see fairly quickly their emotional state, their how their body's being held. Are they kind of hiding and defensive, or are they out and open, and so forth. And so we know that when we look at other people, but we don't always know how our own bodies are carrying our mental state, as it were. And so it's very common for folks when they're having back issues to be under some sort of mental stress. And that mental tension can carry itself in the jaws, can carry itself in the tightness of the shoulders. A lot of women tend to hold the weight of the world on their shoulders, for example. Can hold itself in the tightness in the upper back, and of course in the lower back. And It's just one of the ways in which we end up adapting to our world, as it were. And so when coming in to see the physician for complaint of back pain, the history can give a lot of good information. So please be prepared to come in with a little bit of a story. Sometimes people just have no idea what happened. They just wake up with it and, oh my gosh, it's painful. But very, very often people have some sort of story. They stepped off the curb the wrong way. They had a sudden shock to the spine. They were running when it happened. Usually has to do with lifting and pushing and pulling. Objects that were just a little bit too heavy, but they didn't think they were too heavy at the time. Or maybe they did and it had to be done anyway. So having a good story, what happened right before it came on. With some of the people with chronic back pain, the muscles are so chronically tightened that sometimes even just a little thing, as I was joking before about picking up the hairbrush, that even just picking up something little and itty bitty is like the straw that broke the camel's back, as it were, and it takes a muscle that's a little bit tight and it makes it go and basically makes a very tight spasming muscle. And so that's one of the things that sometimes surprises people when they are coming in with back pain is sometimes they'll feel a knot in their back and they'll be a little scared, like, whoa, where did this lump come from? And it's oftentimes one of those little tiny muscles that got very tight and spasmed. And one of the, I think it's basically a protective mechanism for the back, is when one little tiny muscle gets tight and spasmy, and it doesn't matter whether it's because of emotional or physical strain on that muscle, it just has a tendency to be like a lemming. One little muscle goes, and then it pulls along everybody else for the ride. And sometimes when the muscles start to get tense on both sides of the back, then what can happen is it can set up some nerve feedback loops. So what do I mean by that? Basically is that the connective tissue scars down a little bit and the muscles kind of get tight, and that sends a signal back to the nervous system that goes back to that muscle and then keeps it tight and then keeps that loop going. And so basically one of the things that can be very helpful with back pain is to try to break that little feedback loop, because when the things are tight and then the signal keeps going back on to tighten, 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 pain, 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 that sort of thing there, then by doing some other kind of body work, sometimes that loop can be broken. And so sometimes by just simply getting rid of the pain in one form or another, easy to start off with the very, very basic, simple kinds of things. Remember the basics of heat, ice, massage, pressure rolling or foam rolling can be very helpful. And basically when the initial pain is broken, whether through certain medications such as Tylenol, Motrin, naproxen, as we call NSAIDs, the classic medications that we work with for inflammation, then when that muscle's able to finally relax a little bit, it makes it easier for the person to be able to do some physical thing. Yes, the lemming analogy does tend to go with nerve pain as well to a degree, but it's actually a different mechanism, Crystal. So what is happening there is that the body is this weird, wonderful, dynamic place, right? So back in the day, in the ancient times when I went to medical school, not that long ago, but basically when I was first going through this, we had this idea that everything having to do with the central nervous system, and like this, little model of the brain, not a real brain, obviously. We'd have a much different talk if that was the case. But basically, we used to think that, brains and the central nervous system that was just kind of what it was. It's like a little model. You could look at it, you could do stuff to it, but that of itself, it wasn't really like a growing, changing organ. And now we've learned that nothing could be further from the truth. The brain is constantly rewiring itself. The nervous system is constantly rewiring itself as well. And that ties into something else, which is a major thing with some of the latest developments in chronic pain management and the way that we think about how chronic pain is. It's not just, you cut a nerve like on your finger or something, and that little tiny nerve sends a signal back to the brain, says, ouch, and then the brain says, yep, I got it, that finger is cut or something, right? When people are getting these chronic spasms of the muscles, this chronic pain signal, it actually, in the beginning, the first few days or weeks maybe, it says, ouch, 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 and it's kind of pinging the brain with these little pain signals. In the beginning, the brain's like, okay, got it. Yeah, I don't know, cut your back or something like that. Something's happened, there's a spasming muscle, something's going on that is causing discomfort. And it releases endorphins, it does all sorts of things. Endorphins are like feel-good chemicals that the body does to help itself to heal, or ignore, if for lack of a better word, sometimes the discomfort. And the more that transitions from the acute pain, meaning the pain that is just now happening, I smashed my hand with my little hammer or brush, and that's acute pain. That's like physical, smashy kind of pain. And the more it transitions from the right now tissue damage kind of stuff into this chronic, nagging, gnawing, long-standing pain, the character of the pain in the nervous system itself changes. So as the brain is getting pinged with little pain signals, like going up and zapping to the brain, basically after a while it develops new connections that strengthen that pathway. How wild and crazy is that? So there's all these little tiny support nerves that go all the way down the spine and out to those muscles and nerves and tendons, and maybe they just had a little bit of a protective sheath or a little bit of a support network or scaffolding around it. And then the more that signal goes up, the more the brain says, wow, this must be a really important signal. And the body just naturally creates a pathway to strengthen that signal, which is one of the amazing things about the body. Is one, that we've been able to capture this and watch it as it's happening. We've got the technology now to be able to track these things as never before. But it also opens up new gateways in learning how to deal with said signals, and to be able to retrain our bodies, retrain our brains, retrain our nervous system to be able to turn down or diminish some of the signals. So wild, awesome new stuff. So please also look in the comment section below here, because one of the things I'm going to do tonight is put some links to some books and references that kind of go in detail how this happens. So brings to another segue. The only organ in the body that actually experiences pain, is the brain. Now, hopefully an intact brain, but and it's not just a little bit of the brain that experiences the pain, but the pain, when it comes in, it's experienced across a whole broad region of the brain as well. And so it taps into those emotional centers, it taps into that fear center, basically the entire sense of self-preservation. I mean, pain is kind of an integral part of that. And if you think about it, it's a huge survival thing. If somebody steps on a thorn, for example, If you can't feel it and you ignore it, well, maybe that thorn becomes infected, and next thing you know, you're losing your foot, and next thing you know, you're getting eaten by a tiger. I'm just exaggerating, but here's the thing is that the way in which we have our very, very primal emotions, our very primal sense of self-preservation, when we are getting pinged by this pain, a lot of those very deep emotions and very deep parts of ourselves are feeling threatened, and we respond in a lot of different ways. Some of those ways can be helpful, and some of those ways can unknowingly keep stimulating those pain pathways. One of the neat books that I've been reading on the subject is one by Dr. Norman Doidge. It's called The Brain's Way of Healing. And early on, in one of the early chapters, he's got a beautiful little diagram model of the brain, and he kind of shows how different parts of the brain are basically overtaken by those pain signals. And so it's very common that when people are in these chronic pain situations, they really have trouble sleeping, they have trouble concentrating, they have trouble remembering and learning stuff. They're like, whoa, what did you just say? You know, because they're constantly being distracted by that signal. And so it is one of the reasons why some of the newer technology that is using our brain's ability to remodel itself and to be able to redirect itself, pain is such a strong primal stimulus, so to say. It really is designed to draw the attention, because again, your finger is getting pulled, your finger is getting squished, something's going on with that finger, and basically the whole mind is like, whoa, 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 where are you going with that finger? What's going on there? You know, and so it's acutely designed to just suck you in and really draw the attention down that pathway, because obviously if someone's pulling your finger, if you're stepping on a thorn, I mean, it's basically you got to take care of it, but we don't know what to do, or if there's not an easy, you know, fix to take care of it, then it kind of starts to drive us crazy in a way, and in a kind of a predictable way, as it were. Anyway, so when people take the narcotics and such for their chronic pain, one of the tricky, sly things about the narcotics is it affects us in many ways. It affects us as far as whether we care that the body is having pain. Sometimes with a certain level of narcotic sensation, you're just like, I don't care. Maybe it's a natural high kind of stuff, kind of tapping into those natural endogenous chemicals that the mind and brain naturally produce in order to kind of give us a miniature Band-Aid or something like that. But the other thing is that the opioids do really nothing to help that remodeling phenomenon that happens as the nervous system is strengthened along that pain pathway. And as a matter of fact, and this was something that I'd kind of suspected for a while, especially in my early days of seeing people that were on increasing doses of narcotics, and their pain was always an 8 out of 10, regardless of whether they were on 100 milligrams of methadone and other narcotics, or if they were on 20 milligrams. They would keep telling me, well, my pain is an 8. And I was like, well, how could that be? You're on 3 times as much narcotics, and why is it not working for your pain? And what happens is that the narcotics, if you've got a cut, you know, you smash your finger or something like that, boom, 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 you have an acute, right now, bleeding, broken bones, something that's a right now injury. The narcotics are not a necessarily bad thing for like a few days, maybe a week, something somewhere in there. And don't quote me on these numbers. And I've actually got a real cut. I can, you know, use an example. But anyway, that acute injury, it's really good at kind of dulling the pain. But when it is becoming a everyday or every other day or frequent kind of a Band-Aid that we're using to quiet the initial slight on the body, as it were, then it actually starts to backfire. And the nerves become used to being quieted by the drug. So if I use this as an example, you got a little paper clip here, so this, or sorry, a close clip. So if this is binding to its receptor, and I've got a few other receptors over here, well, if I get more drug binding to those receptors, at some point the body's like, ooh, fun, I've actually got, you know, my fix, my narcotic. I'm actually feeling kind of quiet now because the signal's being dampened. And so what happens when you suddenly lose the thing that's binding to the receptors is that the receptors had kind of gotten used to being soothed. They kind of got used to having that drug attached to it all the time. And now it's more sensitive. Now, instead of being a dulled, quieted nerve, now that nerve is screaming. It's like, whoa, 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 whoa! What happened? Where's my fix? Where's my thing? And then on top of that, if you've got that remodeling thing going, where the pathway itself is becoming more sensitive and more highly attuned to experiencing that pain. Now, not only do you have all these receptors that are themselves more sensitive nerves, but you've got a whole tract that's also more sensitive. And that's one of the reasons why we're in our current opioid crisis kind of thing, is because it can be a very insidious, very sneaky way of people, you know, when you're in that kind of pain, people become desperate to want to quiet that pain. And if you've got the nerves that are already overly used to having something quieting them, well, let's say that someone starts to try to wean off of those narcotics. Oftentimes in the beginning, they'll have a higher perception of pain. Even things that normally would not be painful would maybe be painful for them in that state. And so one of the reasons that they recommend now being very selective with what situations is someone going to have the narcotics in is because sometimes the level of narcotic that it takes to soothe, you know, just using these as, you know, example narcotics soothing the receptors, sometimes that can get to a point where you soothe the nerve, but the respiratory drive in the brain, the part of the brain that makes you breathe, well, that's also getting, you know, clipped with the receptors as well. And I've seen it happen where sometimes people so self-soothe themselves with the narcotic. Like, for example, if you're in a hospital getting an IV, they sometimes have these things where you can push a button and get a little more dose of narcotic, that they kind of just put themselves to sleep, and sometimes their drive to breathe really can slow down. And that's one of the other dangers of the narcotics as well, is because certain medications can change the ratio between how much receptor is stimulated versus how much the receptors for breathing are stimulated. And people can very easily accidentally change that balance, because sometimes it's a very small dose change of the narcotic that can go from being a therapeutic level to a dangerous or deadly level. And people can accidentally go into comas or lose consciousness and basically die from not being able to breathe and such on there. So anyway, so getting off into serious topics there, but just current events, being that it's very common in our country right now. So anyway, back to the back pain. So took a quick detour around the narcotics on there. So most back pain, as I started off saying, is just an irritated muscle that's that gets strained for some reason or another. Usually a little bit of relative rest, or just not pushing the heavy box or whatever it was that was triggering it in the first place, and taking extra care to have a good posture and other simple things can be an easy fix. Most of that happens, and it feels a lot better within 24, 72 hours. So within a few days, mostly people are feeling better. One of the mistakes people make sometimes in these early days of that first shot of pain is they curl up in bed and they don't move. Well, if you don't move the body, all that lovely connective tissue, which is all up and down the back, basically that gets tight, it gets tensed, and that can contribute to stiffness. So when somebody's having initial backache, most of the time it's okay to move around. We are so habitually trained, if it hurts, don't touch it. If it hurts, don't move it. In the case of back pain, especially in the beginning, some movement is very, very helpful. And in fact, regularly moving is something that can be protective against back pain. When people are exercising on a regular basis, doing back strengthening exercises, belly strengthening exercises, all those different kinds of things can be very helpful. And if you got any questions on that, on the references section, I'll have some links to more information on the back and a very nice physical therapy guided one by one, point by point exercises that can be helpful as well. And yes, Crystal, yoga is a very common way. I mean, the Hatha yoga, the people are doing physical postures and such. And as with anything, please be mindful that the people who are teaching it may have different levels of experience. And for example, if somebody's like standing on you and trying to yank your arms or something like that, it might not be the best match. But many forms of the physical exercises, I mean, basically Hatha yoga postures put people in a lot of different positions that they're not doing when they're stuck in front of a computer, typing all day, or even more common, curled over and typing. I'm exaggerating, of course, but we kind of get used to this forward flexion thing and forget how to stand up, forget how to breathe properly for the diaphragm, and we're not using those back extension muscles nearly as much as in certain Hatha yoga posture sequences. So maybe one of these days I'll do some recording on that as well. If you look in the exercises section, I did some very, very, very gentle mind-body awareness kind of techniques that allow someone to practice putting their attention in different parts of the body. It's a fun little thing, so maybe I'll put the link in there too. So, other things you can do for the back pain. The first thing is usually to relax. And if you're not used to mindfully relaxing, that can be a very important skill to learn, and probably do more on that in the future. So stay tuned. There's a lot more ideas to come out for you guys. So if it is something where you've had what we call a red flag situation, so these are kind of important to keep in the back of your mind too. And these are things that you really ought not to necessarily sit on, so to say. So if you, for example, have been in a car accident or a boat accident or something where you're going at high velocity and you fall off of something, you hit your back, someone hits you with a baseball bat. I mean, these are not the kind of situation that you necessarily will sit home and, do a simple back stretch for, right? Those are things that you want to get checked out, and like maybe an emergency room, right? So significant trauma. If you happen to be over age 50 and have a milder form of trauma, that potentially could be also a little bit damaging to the back. So I don't have an exact on that. Unexplained weight loss. So if you're going through life and you're not really making any diet changes, obviously if you check out some of our video suggestions or the new documentary, What the Health, cool stuff on Netflix, you might find that you're losing weight, but that's because you did something. You made a change, you exercised, you did something specifically to lose weight. If you're just kind of mousing along through life and all of a sudden you're noticing, wow, where's my clothes are getting a little bit looser, how did that happen? And you got some back pain to go along with it, do get it checked out, because sometimes there can be some conditions like infections or other processes like cancers and stuff sometimes that's how they showed up. Immune system problems. So if you've got a immunosuppressant going on, so this next few ones are things that can predispose people to getting an infection deep in the bones. So if you've had a recent infection, so if you've had a skin infection or something, and then all of a sudden you get this really not nice back pain out of the blue, unexplained fevers, if you're soaking the bed sheets and you've got back pain in a specific spot along there. Immunosuppression, again, if somebody has got HIV, for example, or if they've got an arthritis that they're taking Humira or some of the other chemotoxic chemicals that suppress your immune system, someone on chemotherapy, for example, other things that can suppress the immune system. Speaking of chemo, cancers, if you have a history of cancer, or if you know you've got a cancer right now that's being worked on, then all of a sudden you have a strong back pain. IV drug use, thankfully right now I haven't seen anybody with that in a long time, but if you are doing IV drugs, dirty needles happen, amongst other things. Many ways in which we can harm ourselves, but that can cause a specific infection in the bones of the spine. Thin bones, so osteoporosis, if somebody is older and they have that kyphosis, the curling where the spine fuses in that curled over position, or otherwise things that predispose the bones to being brittle and thin. Chronic steroid use. Again, one of the other reasons why I really like with some of the kind of combination approach to reduce the need for steroids to go in the body is that they can thin the bones, especially the longer they're used. If somebody's over age 70, a big risk factor for osteoporosis and thin bones, they actually sometimes can break the back a little bit, like little tiny fractures, and that's why they get fused in these areas as well. As oftentimes they'll have a sharp pain and it'll be a little bone crunching on itself. Focal nerve deficit. So if you're going along and all of a sudden you've got numbness, tingling, weakness of a body part, then that can be a specific tract that got dinged. Unable to hold back your bladder or your bowels. If you're having some back pain and all of a sudden you're pooing and peeing on yourself, or you just can't quite get to the bathroom in time, that can tell us something important might be going on there. So again, these are reasons to go to the emergency room sooner than later. Saddle anesthesia. So last but not least, saddle anesthesia refers to basically the inner thighs and the part of the body that would be touching a saddle if you happen to be riding a horse. So groin area, butt area, all that inner kind of stuff there. If that's going numb, especially if you're having trouble controlling your bladder or bowels at the time, those are red flags, warning sign. And again, if the duration, if it's been going on longer for 6 weeks, those are kind of red flags that we use to discern, oh, something else besides that little bitty muscle spasm might be going on as well. So please, if you're having any of those symptoms, yes, reach for your heating pad, but also reach for your telephone and call your local primary care, go to your local emergency room to have a discussion, because again, as always, I can only do so much by talking to a telephone on a stand here. So alrighty, so next section is, now that you've got a little bit of sense for some of the neat new things that are in line for basically ways in which you can address chronic pain, is to look at things that can be done through food, for example. And I've got an example right here of cherries, for example, can be used as a part of a very healthy diet. In general, the more beans and greens and berries that a person is eating, it actually is helpful not just with improving the blood flow through the back, but also the more fiber you get, the lower the cholesterol is, and just generally overall better health as it is anyway. The cherries are fun because the sweet Bing cherries, you see that nice, beautiful, dark red color to it? Those acanthocyanins, those phytonutrients, are actually very similar to Motrin. And berries in general have phytonutrients that are very good for fighting muscle pain and inflammation. In fact, sometimes weightlifters will down like a berry smoothie after their workout at the gym because of that strong anti-inflammatory property to it. That ties in with the back in another surprising twist as well. So we talked about the muscles and the nerves and ways in which they can get out of whack, so to say. But also, those little tiny blood vessels can be very, very important in causing or contributing to back degeneration. And you'd be like, wait, what, blood vessels? What on earth has that got to do with anything? One of my favorite doctors, Dr. Greger, on nutritionfacts.org, has a series of videos in which he actually shows the blood vessels and such. Let's see if I can pull it up on this iPad over here while I'm going. This may or may not show up as well on the camera as I was hoping. So here's my little prop here. And right there you see, aha, that is, oops, trying to just get the picture to show up. It's a little bit faint there, but basically you can see there's a blood vessel and there's the spine there. And you can see how tiny and fine those supporting blood vessels are. Well, if you are using tobacco, for example, all right, let me set that down. If you're using tobacco and or eating a Western diet, which for the most part is very high in fat and very low in vegetable products and fiber, then there's a good chance that your blood is a little bit sluggish, that the cholesterol levels are high, and those little itty bitty blood vessels that are feeding your nerves and your bones and your other components of the spine, that those blood vessels may be getting blocked off. And what happens with that is that the bones are very delicate in this area. The discs, so if I got my little model spine handy dandy over here, and so these are the bones of the spine, and these little soft things in the middle, those are discs. They're kind of like this cartilage that's squishy. It's kind of like the shock absorbers of the spine, right? So when we run, the whole spine flexes and moves and kind of absorbs the shocks of the activity. That's why some activities like running are high impact, because they are just pounding on the spine, as it were. But anyway, this really does not have a very good blood supply. It just kind of, the blood supply goes out so far, and then it just kind of soaks up the nutrients by having to, the nutrients have to cross this fluid to get to these spaces. And when people have got poor nutrition, not a lot of phytonutrients, and they're smoking, so the blood vessels are getting clamped off and clogged up with the nicotine. It kind of causes those blood vessels to narrow and diminishes the flow of blood to these areas. Then they're much more likely to become arthritic and to break down and remodel and cause all sorts of little spiky, spiny things to show up in here. And on this model here, one of the things that those red flags are talking about, it's got it painted red, so it's like obvious, like, hey, there's a problem there. Sometimes when that degeneration happens, it's more likely that the spine is going to have a squished disc. And basically, so rotating the spine around, so if you're looking at it the other way, these are like little spiny things coming out and stuff. These little nerve roots coming out. There's just a little bit of space where those nerve roots are coming out, and so it doesn't necessarily take a lot of crowding or inflammation in those spaces to kind of squish on the nerves a little bit. And for example, as I rotate around to just show where that squished nerve is being highlighted, so if there's a little crowding of the disc getting squished, then perhaps maybe one of these nerves is connected to that sciatic, which is the big wire that goes like down your butt and down the back of your leg and over to your toes and all that kind of stuff. If one of these is squishing that, then you feel like a lightning bolt jolting down the leg. So there's certain tests that we do in clinic, we call it the straight leg raise and so forth, that basically causes the leg to pull on that wire and stretches it, and basically if we can trigger it, you're like, oop, that's probably a disc. With some of the modern physical therapy techniques, it's really neat. They can do different kinds of things to kind of make these sometimes go back in. But if you've got like a, I hate to say like a crappy spine, like if the discs are kind of getting all arthritis because they don't really have a good blood supply and all that sorts of stuff, and then it's going to be a little bit harder to fix this, as it were, just through some of those more conservative methods alone. So. You mentioned Hatha Yoga, foam rolling, I mentioned very briefly. There are actually places around that you can learn foam rolling from. So probably best, if you're able to learn that from a human being, so that you make sure that you're doing it right, so you don't accidentally squish it and stuff. Chiropractors can be very helpful. I don't know what kind of back cracking you're referring to, Crystal, exactly, but some chiropractors are, better than others at certain ways. Sometimes it can be very helpful to get the spine realigned, because sometimes if you twist a box the wrong way and you pick it up, maybe a spine might get kind of caught just a little bit to the side, and they can do things to rearrange it. Again, all depending on who you are, what's your risk factors. If you're, for example, got very thin bones, you don't necessarily want somebody doing too much manipulation, but a good chiropractor or someone who's very skilled in these sorts of things ought to be able to, suss out your individual situation, as it were. Let's see, put my spine back here. Massage can be very helpful for a lot of people, and I know in town that we have a few different areas that do massage as well. There's even some massage schools around, and if you're feeling brave, you can always give it a whirl, because people have got to learn how to do massage somewhere, and they usually offer much discounted rates at the massage schools if you're having a student working on you. If you're having some chronic issues, you might want to spend a little more money and have the professionals do it. I know at some of the gyms, like for example the Planet Fitness gym, which is down by the mall over here, they've got these little things where you can kind of lie on a bed-like thing, and it shoots little jets of water up and down the spine. There are massage chairs. Again, some of the mechanical things are a little bit different than having a live human being kind of poking at things. And again, what they're doing when they're manipulating those tissues is they're basically working that connective tissue and trying to break up a little bit of that scar tissue. So sometimes in the beginning, someone can get more discomfort from a massage than benefit, mostly because that inflammation, they're kind of stirring stuff up a little bit. And they usually will tell people to drink some water and rest relatively after a deep tissue massage. Other things, so there's electrical stimulation that sometimes they do over at physical therapy. Physical therapy can be very, very, very helpful for the back, not only in treating the chronic thing, but they can teach you those lifting techniques. They can check your posture. But they also have little devices like the little electrical things that can kind of stimulate the area as well. Let's see. Then there is the chiropractor, of course. We've got plenty of those as well. And when people are doing certain postures, for example, and see you're mentioning that you crack your back there, and sometimes people just kind of get in the right spot and they feel something move and it feels good, and that's okay. I think there's nothing really wrong with that. But when someone is going to a professional, they can kind of get sometimes a little more fine-tuning as well. And again, it makes a difference with which professional. I know that sometimes people worry with a chiropractor because those little blood vessels, they go up to the brain. They're called vertebral arteries, and very rarely they can have some complications with that, depending on what's being done and where. And again, those are conversations to have with a real life human being professional that is seeing you and your situation. Acupuncture, that's another one. So drawing from the whole gamut of people around the world, folks in China, long time ago, figured out different ways of being able to influence that nervous system. And, back in the 1970s, I think it was, a Western reporter went out there and actually had suffered, I think, appendicitis or something, and was absolutely amazed. The local doctors did not have Western anesthesia, go figure, because it's another country and they had their own methods of doing things back at that particular time. Or maybe it just wasn't available for one reason or another, but whatever happened, they received acupuncture as their way of getting anesthetized. And it's not in the Western lexicon, but it worked, and it worked amazingly well. And they came back, utterly mind blown, like, whoa, what just happened here? And the dialogue between East and West as far as some of these techniques has come out. So there's more research on it lately. They think they might have found out the mechanism by which it works. Really cool stuff. Maybe we'll talk about it at a future episode. But sometimes a chiropractor with multiple treatments can be helpful as well. And let's see, so just kind of mentally reviewing the list of stuff I usually go with. Biofeedback. This is another neat one. So in the age of modern gizmos and technology and stuff, it's even easier than ever to use a biofeedback machine with your own cell phone and maybe like a little set of wires or something. They actually sell these little devices that can work with somebody on this. So the idea there is that there are parts of the body that we're just not consciously aware of. So, for example, if I'm aware of the muscle tension, then I can be like, oh, what am I doing there? Okay. And you can consciously relax certain muscles. Sometimes there's just an overall kind of tension, and we're just not kind of aware of it because it's there all the time. We just kind of feel like that's who we are and how we got to be and all that good stuff. And it can happen on that way in just a little more subtle level. And if we are learning how to consciously relax, there are certain things that happen in the body naturally when we start to relax that we just don't have an awareness of. And so what these little devices do is they tap into some of those things and they bring it to your awareness. So, for example, the heart rate, there's a variability, like sometimes it beats a little faster, sometimes a little slower. And when we're stressed out, there's a lot of different patterns in which that can happen, which of course most of us are like not sitting here aware of exactly how our heart's functioning, right? And so these things can sense the pulse and sense the change in the heartbeat. And as you consciously practice relaxing, it like picks up when it gets into those more relaxed patterns. Similarly, the galvanic skin response is another wild one. But basically, the amount of electricity, the resistance that goes between one finger and another finger, if we're tensed, it's, I think, more resistance, and I think as we relax, the electricity passes just a little bit easier. Anyway, it's a little way of being able to tap into consciously something you're not able to normally be aware of. Regardless of which mechanism it is, you can look on some of those internet shopping sites and find a few examples of it. But it's kind of fun little technology to play with. Basically, usually it creates a little tone like, and as you relax, it goes, and if you start to get stressed out, it goes, so anyway, and after a while, at the beginning, it's like, and kind of crazy making. You're like, what is going on with this thing? But after a while, you start to learn to go, and kind of retrains the brain, and you learn to relax better, I guess. So anyway, so that's kind of fun. And there's some psychologists that can actually teach you how to do that as well. Speaking of psychology, another one of my favorite things to do is to have people learn about this kind of stuff. It is backwards, of course, on the paper, but it's called the Gateway Control Theory of Pain. And as mentioned in the very beginning of this, the idea that the pain signals that are happening in the far reaches of the body, they don't just go straight up to the brain. but they kind of go through a series of other nerves, and those are called pathways or gates. And there's a whole bunch of different things that determine how easily those signals go from injured area to the brain, or things that you can do that will actually make it a little bit harder. So I think what I'll do is, rather than going through the whole handout in this very section, because it's like a 4-page handout, it goes over physical, emotional, mental, and behavioral kinds of things. Maybe we'll go through that in more detail the next one. Actually, maybe I'll do it just very briefly. So things that make that pain gate more open. Basically, the extent of the injury. So if someone comes at you with a sledgehammer, is going to be a lot more injurious than if somebody goes at you with a little clippy thing, for example. So obvious on there. Readiness of the nervous system to send pain signals. So again, if somebody's been using narcotics and has a sensitized nervous system, it will more readily pass those signals up. Inappropriate activity level, that I see a lot. Somebody's got a chronic tenseness or tightness of the back, and then they decide that it's their day to shovel snow. I used to see that a lot after snowstorms up north. Not so much here in Florida, but who knows, maybe as the wintertime comes around. Sometimes you'll see it after a cold snap. Very common that just the plain old fact of the air being a little bit colder, kind of we tighten up those muscles, and then tends to be going forth. Other things that open the pain gate, so the emotional section, depression, worry, anxiety, tension, and anger, all of those things. So if you're in pain, you're going to be a little more irritable than usual, probably. And as much as you can, learning to be calm in the face of annoying things that happen can actually help you close that pain gate and make it not hurt quite so much. And again, those are things that are best explored a little bit more with a human being professional who knows you and knows what your situation is. Mentally, focusing on the pain. So if I've got a little something going on that's annoying, it's a little clippy thing, like, the more that I zoom in on it, so practicing like zooming in, basically if I zoom in on it, oh my gosh, look at that. Now it's going to like take over the entire, view of my attention and vision. Our brain is a wonderful magnifying glass, so the more that we zoom in on something, the bigger it gets and the more intensely we experience it. And vice versa, if we're able to kind of distract and, make it go away, and then we can kind of let go of that a bit. So focusing on the pain intensifies the pain. Boredom due to minimal involvement in life activities. So if your only goal in life is to click that clicker or basically hide from the world or other ways not engage in the world very much, then that also is going to intensify the pain. Very often if people are sitting at home and they've got hardly anything to do and they're bored, well, basically that will intensify it as well. Non-adaptive attitudes, so another thing to explore with a mental health professional maybe, but attitudes in which it basically is hurting yourself or hurting your situation. Behavioral, withdrawal from positive life activities, so you're in pain, you don't feel like interacting, and then you kind of slowly withdraw from the world, withdraw from life. That intensifies the pain. And then, generally speaking, those poor health habits. So if your idea of a good time is to sit back with a beer and a cigarette and cheeseburger or something like that, then all of those things, for multiple reasons, are going to be inflammatory to the body and cause your pain levels to increase. Now, things that you can do that close the pain gate, as we talked about at the beginning, application of heat or cold. Any of those temperature things that are put on a painful area can both deaden or modify the signals that are being sent up. Nerve, vibration, so pain, vibration, and temperature are carried on the same nerve pathway, the same little fibers. And so by putting a little pressure or by changing the temperature of the area, we can change how that signal is crossing. Massage, again, that's a physical way of closing that gate. Relaxation skills. So the more that you learn and practice some sort of relaxation skill, the more that your body is going to be able to respond in an appropriate way, or a better way, or a more relaxed way to the pain. The appropriate activity levels. So again, watch out weekend warriors. And the appropriate activity level may be depending on not only your overall general conditioning and your condition in whether you've got an illness or something else going on, but appropriate to your level. So very common that we teach people pacing. So in other words, if standing washing dishes is hard because it's lifting up your arms and doing a lot of work over here, if you're doing it old-fashioned way, or bending and putting it into the dishwasher, well, maybe instead of trying to force your way through the whole activity all in one fell swoop, well, maybe do a little bit, stop, take a break, go do the bills, go do something totally different, and then go back to it a little bit, and then, you know, and that way you're varying the activities and not just pushing straight through. Emotional things that can close that pain gate, so avoiding excessive emotions, trying not to get overly worked up or excited or angry or something. So when somebody cuts you off, if your habit is to go rah, rah, you know, and start to really get that fan of anger, you maybe look at it like, yep, okay, so maybe I left a little bit too much space between my car and the next. Of course, that guy's going to go over there and, you know, cut me off. Anyway, some way in which you can reframe the situation so that you're not triggering those emotions, which release all that cortisol and cause all that additional stress on the body. Managing stress, or learning different techniques to deal with common things that happen in life. Mental, distracting away from the pain and doing some other activities, something else that is able to draw your attention away from that pain center. Increased social activities, so it's wonderful to be able to have friends around. You might check out my video presentation on overcoming obstacles, in which I had some great support from some of my friends who surrounded me with teddy bears and stuff, just because because we could, I guess. Positive attitude. That can go a long way as well. And it can be very, if somebody's experienced a problem for a while, it can be very easy to fall into the trap of it's always going to be this way, it's never going to get any better. Instead, you can change some of those words to, for example, yes, things are tough right now, but I'm sure it will get better, or I'm searching for a way to get better, or I'm learning about a new technique, and some of this with time, you know. So different ways in which you mentally frame a situation can make a big difference in the long haul. Increased positive life activities, so behavioral activation, appropriate exercise. So again, not being a couch potato, but getting out and doing something. Even if it's very, very small, something to get started, you know, walking a little bit, working with a physical exercise trainer to just do a little bit, you know. Everybody can even do pinky exercises, for example, unless you have trouble with it. Anyway, so healthy eating, again, all those beautiful phytonutrients, keep your bowels going, keep your blood vessels healthy, and refraining from unhealthy habits. So learning to quit tobacco is, of course, one of the biggest ones that I see in clinic as well. So there's more on the different kinds of things, like how to get realistic goals and activities of how much time you're doing different kinds of activities. So keeping logs like that can be helpful to get a sense for where you're starting from and where you're going. So again, I hope you've enjoyed this little survey of some ideas and tips and tricks for back pain. Very, very common again. But there's a lot of good stuff that can be done to beginning to take hold of and regain control of your life. Even if it's just something as very simple to start off with as going to the store and getting a few cherries or berries or something like that. Even if it doesn't give you like instant relief. I mean, obviously, eating a cherry or two, if you've got a chronic issue going on, is not likely to be a miracle cure that fixes everything. But every little bit that you do that will nourish your health, your vitality, your body, your spirit, your mind, all that kind of stuff can interact and have a profound effect on not only how you experience something like pain, but where you end up going forward in life as well. So anyway, there's a lot more that could be said on back pain, but the hour is getting late, and I'm sure that you're going to be able to meet with your own personal physician and therapists and basically be able to design a program that's individualized and works for you. Okay? And so I wish you all well. I hope you have a pain-free evening and or day, whichever time you happen to watch this presentation. And have a good night. Sayonara. You're welcome. Good night. Bye-bye.